feeling crushed by troubles. Psalm 4, divine prayer for instant protection. Don't suffer alone. Are you carrying a weight that feels too heavy to bear? Do the pressures of life leave you feeling crushed, uncertain, and utterly alone? You're not here by accident, and this moment could be the turning point your heart has been crying out for. Right now, you might feel overwhelmed by anxiety, sleepless nights, or the suffocating silence of wrestling with your struggles. But there's something you need to hear. A timeless prayer, born out of desperation centuries ago, can meet you exactly where you are today. Centuries ago, a man surrounded by battles, enemies, and betrayal cried out to God in his darkest hour. That man was King David, and the prayer he wrote echoes across the ages in Psalm 4, a plea for divine protection and peace. This is not just poetry from the Bible. It's a cry from a weary soul, calling out for the strength and clarity only God can give. And here's the truth. Those words have the power to change your situation, not just externally, but right in the core of your spirit. What if I told you that the peace you desperately crave isn't as far away as it feels? Here, in Psalm 4, lies a simple prayer that holds the key to realigning your focus, quieting your soul, and allowing the presence of God to calm the chaos around you. God's protection isn't something abstract. It's a tangible refuge waiting to surround you even now. As you listen to this message, if you've ever asked yourself, how do I make it through this pain? Or where is God when I feel so broken? Then keep watching. In the next few minutes, we'll journey into the life-changing wisdom of Psalm 4. Together, we'll see how this ancient prayer can turn despair into hope, heartbreak into healing, and fear into unshakable faith. By the end of this message, you'll discover why you don't need to carry this burden alone. There is strength waiting for you. There is clarity waiting for you. And there is divine protection that's closer than you think. What you have to do is take the first step. Understanding Psalm 4, a psalm of refuge. 1 Psalm 4 stands as a sacred testament to finding refuge in the most desperate moments of life. Picture David, a man not only bearing the weight of a kingdom, but wrestling with betrayal, uncertainty, and danger at every turn. His enemies were closing in from all sides. His circumstances were enough to crush even the strongest of hearts. Yet in the darkness of those moments, he didn't collapse into fear. He cried out to God. This ancient psalm is David's raw, unfiltered prayer, born from the kind of suffering we all face in some way. It is not just a relic of the past, but a living guide for finding divine protection in the storms of today. The opening line alone gives us a glimpse of David's heart. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. Notice the rhythm of this cry. It begins with boldness, a confidence that God will hear him. This is no timid request. David openly calls on God to respond, not because he doubts him, but because he intimately knows God's character. Embedded in these words is the extraordinary certainty that God not only listens, but also acts. It's a lesson for us all. When life feels overwhelming, we can reach out to God with courage and expectancy, knowing he is already close. David does something we often overlook in moments of crisis. While we tend to focus on our fears and fixate on our doubts, David does the opposite. He begins by remembering. He recalls how God has delivered him in the past, saying, "You have given me relief when I was in distress." These words aren't casual, they are filled with gratitude and trust. David is choosing to anchor himself in God's faithfulness, bringing to mind the countless times God has already come through for him. And here lies a powerful spiritual principle. Even when you feel trapped by despair, pausing to reflect on how God has carried you before can reignite faith and rekindle hope. David shows us that when we are crushed by troubles, remembering God's past mercies can be the first step toward peace. But this prayer isn't just about remembering what God has done. It's also about fully trusting what God will do. David turns his desperate cry into a declaration of confidence in God's righteousness. He knows that God's ways are higher, His justice is perfect, and His timing is unshakable. This isn't blind optimism. It's deep-rooted faith born from walking with God through life's battles. This truth is critical for us today. When we focus only on the uncertainty of our circumstances, we open the door to fear. But when we shift our gaze to God's ability to work good even in the midst of chaos, our trust is renewed and peace becomes possible. Psalm 4 also speaks to a deeper aspect of surrender. By calling God his refuge, David is acknowledging something profound. Peace is not found in control, but in letting go. The world tells us that strength comes from fixing our problems or pushing through them on our own. But David, a powerful king, understood that true strength lies not in striving but in trusting. This is a countercultural message. Amid the demands of modern life, where self-reliance is often celebrated, Psalm 4 offers a refreshing, timeless perspective. It invites us to admit that we can't do it all and challenges us to put our hope in something far greater than ourselves. There's also a deep connection in this passage to human vulnerability. David isn't hiding his struggles. He is transparent before God, laying his pain and fears bare. This kind of prayer, honest, unpolished, is what opens the door to real intimacy with God. Sometimes we think we need to have perfect faith or the right words, but David reminds us that God meets us in our authenticity. When we feel crushed by the weight of life, we don't need to pretend to be okay. God doesn't just tolerate our brokenness, He responds to it with grace and protection. When we look at Psalm 4 as a whole, it's clear that it holds a powerful message for anyone who feels overwhelmed. This psalm reminds us that no problem is too big or too small to bring before God. It also teaches us that in times of distress, the solution isn't to run faster or try harder, it's to stop, to remember God's goodness and to cry out to Him. When we follow David's example, we find that even in the darkest moments, God's refuge is real, His protection is near, and His peace surpasses anything we could try to manufacture on our own. Psalm 4 isn't just ancient wisdom, it's a living invitation to lay down your burdens and rest in the protective presence of God, a cry for God's help, the first line of faith. When David begins Psalm 4 with the words, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness," it's not a casual opening. It is the raw cry of a soul caught between fear and faith. David's life was filled with moments of intense struggle and uncertainty, and this prayer reveals the reality of human vulnerability. But what makes this first line so profoundly relevant is how it sets the tone for approaching God not with hesitation or doubt, but with boldness and trust. David doesn't hold back. He doesn't sugarcoat his desperation. He calls on the God of his righteousness, confident in God's character and His ability to act. This cry is not one of entitlement, but of recognition. David acknowledges that righteousness itself comes from God. It's as if he's saying, "Lord, you are the one who makes me right, who gives me purpose, and who stands as my advocate. Please hear me now." These words carry a lesson that is timeless. When life's troubles leave us feeling crushed, our first instinct is often to panic or withdraw. But David shows us something radically different. He turns immediately to prayer not as a last resort, but as his first and only strategy. This is faith in action. The phrase "answer me when I call" reflects a deep assurance. David isn't wondering whether or not God hears him. He knows he does. This confidence wasn't built on fleeting emotions or blind hope. It was forged through countless experiences of God's faithfulness. David had seen God intervene in battles, provide safety in the wilderness, and deliver him from harm time and again. This is why he can ask boldly for protection. It's a kind of faith we need in today's world. Life can be unpredictable, filled with challenges that seem far beyond our control. Yet, like David, we can call out to God in unwavering trust, knowing that His ear is always inclined toward us. The next part of the verse, "You have given me relief when I was in distress," paints a vivid picture of God's past deliverance. David doesn't approach God as though this is the first time he's in need. He reminds himself of the evidence of God's intervention in his life. This isn't just a recollection of good times. It's an active choice to anchor his present fears in the proof of past faithfulness. How often do we forget to reflect on the ways God has already provided for us, carried us, and calmed storms we thought would destroy us? David's words challenge us to pause and remember. When we remind ourselves of what God has already done, it builds a trust that can withstand even the most severe trials. This verse also highlights an important spiritual dynamic. Desperation and faith are not opposites. They coexist. David's tone is one of deep pleading, yet it's layered with confidence. It shows us that coming to God with honest emotions doesn't make us weak, it makes us real. Too often, we think faith means suppressing our struggles, but Psalm 4 demonstrates the opposite. True faith is bringing every fear, every doubt, and every moment of anguish to the feet of God, trusting that He is big enough to handle them all. Your cry for help doesn't need to be polished or perfect. David's wasn't. What matters is that it's genuine. The closing of this verse, "Be gracious to me and hear my prayer," captures the essence of dependence. David acknowledges his need for God's grace, that unmerited favor that meets us at our lowest. This plea for grace reminds us of our own relationship with God. We don't approach Him because we've earned the right to be heard. We come because He invites us to. Grace is the bridge between our human fragility and God's divine goodness. David's prayer shows us that we can rest in the fact that our cries will never go unheard. Not because of what we deserve, but because of who God is. This single verse from Psalm 4 carries a wealth of spiritual insight. It teaches us to approach God with boldness, to remember His faithfulness, to embrace our vulnerability, and to rely entirely on His grace. Within this one line lies a roadmap for navigating life's greatest pressures. It starts by crying out with confidence and honesty, not to a distant deity, but to a loving Father who has never failed His children. David demonstrates that no matter how overwhelming the storm may feel, we are never alone. The same God who answered the cries of a king in distress is ready to answer you. As we continue, we'll see how this cry unfolds into a divine invitation for peace, protection, and restoration. Facing anxiety, the promise of peace amid chaos. Anxiety often feels like a storm raging within, an unrelenting tide of thoughts and worries that refuse to quiet down. For many, it's a silent struggle, an internal war that leaves no visible wounds but drains both strength and hope. David knew this battle all too well. As we see in Psalm 4, verses 2 and 3, David turns his plea for help into a powerful declaration, exposing our human tendency to seek solace in the wrong places, while shining a light on the kind of peace. God offers peace rooted in trust and resilience, even in chaos. You people, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? These words may seem specific to David's time, but they reflect something timeless about human behavior. David is addressing those who turn to false promises, temporary solutions, and deceptive comforts to ease their struggles. How often do we, too, seek relief in things that ultimately fail? Whether it's the endless chase for success, numbing distractions, or futile attempts to fix things on our own, too often we run toward what cannot sustain us. David exposes this tendency, not as judgment, but as an invitation to pause and reflect. Where are we truly placing our trust in moments of distress? Are we clinging to fleeting things or turning to the source of everlasting peace? David's focus then sharpens. He declares, "But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him." This is a remarkable shift in tone. From addressing the external turmoil around him, David moves inward, straight to the heart of his relationship with God. Here, he reminds himself thus of an unshakable truth. Those who belong to the Lord are never outside of his care. This statement is more than a reassurance. It's a foundational truth that uproots anxiety at its core. To know that you are set apart by the Creator of the universe, chosen and held close, is to reject the lies that tell you that you're alone or forgotten. David isn't hoping God hears him. He knows it. Certainty is the antidote to fear, and this knowledge becomes an anchor in the storm. What's striking about this declaration is how it redefines the nature of peace. Peace isn't the absence of trouble, it's the presence of God in the midst of it. The chaos around David didn't dissolve instantly, just as our troubles often don't. But the knowledge that God hears, cares, and acts transforms how we endure these challenges. Faith doesn't demand that the storm disappears. It invites us to trust the one guiding us through it. David's words echo a deeper theological truth that resonates through Christian spirituality. Anxiety thrives where trust is absent. This is not to dismiss the complexity of anxiety, especially as it relates to mental health, but to point out that our spiritual well-being is deeply connected to where we place our focus. In modern terms, consider how science shows the effects of prayer and meditative trust on the brain. When we intentionally redirect our thoughts towards something greater, when we surrender to God through prayer and declare our trust in Him, it has a measurable, calming effect on our mind and body. Levels of stress decrease, and peace begins to take root. Not because the situation changes, but because our perspective does. David's declaration that the Lord hears him isn't just spiritual. It's transformative on every level: mental, emotional, and spiritual. In verse 3, David teaches us something about God that reshapes our approach to anxiety. The Lord is personal. To be set apart by God isn't to be distant from Him. It's to be in close, intimate relationship with Him. When we cry out, He hears us not as some distant force, but as a loving Father deeply invested in our lives. The psalm invites us into this closeness, this steadying presence that quiets the storm within, even if the storm outside continues. An extraordinary aspect of this passage is how David's confidence in God isn't just theoretical, it is active. By placing his focus on God's sovereignty and care, David effectively silences the lies of fear and worry. Anxiety feeds on uncertainty, but David leans into the certainty of God's character. This is where faith rewires our thinking. Instead of being overwhelmed by what we cannot control, we are reminded who is in control. This isn't denial of reality, it is a reframing of it. Faith doesn't minimize our struggles, empowers us to face them with divine strength. Today, many of us are consumed by the noise of modern life, the constant pressures of comparison, success, and uncertainty. David's cry in Psalm 4 shows us that peace is possible even here, even now. By anchoring our identity and struggles in the God who hears us, we open the door to peace that isn't shaken by circumstances. Peace doesn't come from ignoring the chaos around us, but from placing our trust in the one who has already overcome it. As we move forward in this psalm, David's journey will continue to lead us toward even deeper truths about finding calm and clarity in God's presence. Each line reveals something extraordinary, that no matter how overwhelming life becomes, faith, trust, and God's unchanging love can carry us through. Silence the noise, a call to inner reflection. When we are overwhelmed by the weight of life, the natural response is often to seek solutions externally. We try to fix, organize, or distract ourselves from the chaos. Yet, Psalm 4:4 takes an entirely different approach. David writes, "Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent." These words are a direct challenge to how we process our struggles. Rather than react impulsively, David calls us into a quiet, introspective state of place where we can meet God, far removed from the noise of the world. The phrase "be angry" instantly stands out. Anger, for many, is considered a negative or destructive emotion, but here it is acknowledged as part of the human experience. David isn't condemning anger. He's addressing how we respond to it. Anger often arises from unmet expectations, frustrations, or deep pain. It has the power to consume us, leading to sin and further distress. Instead, David redirects this powerful emotion, encouraging us to confront it and lay it before God. This practice requires discipline and intentional pause to reflect rather than react. Imagine how different our lives would look if, instead of letting anger drive us, we allowed it to be a signal that we need to retreat to God in prayer. David points us to a specific practice. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. This line captures an essential truth that modern life often neglects: the need for stillness. In a culture that thrives on activity, constant noise, and endless distractions, the idea of sitting silently, alone with our thoughts and with God, feels almost foreign. And yet, this is exactly where transformation begins. Silence is not emptiness. It is space created for God's presence to move and for clarity to emerge. It's in these quiet moments of reflection that we can begin to honestly assess the state of our hearts and hear God's gentle guidance. There's both a theological and psychological depth to this verse. Theologically, it reflects the importance of surrender. Silence signals a willingness to stop striving and allow God to work. It's a recognition that when our own efforts fail, resting in the knowledge of God's sovereignty provides the relief our souls need. Psychologically, silence is restorative. Studies show that intentional periods of quiet help calm the mind, reduce stress, and create space for greater This is why practices like prayer and meditation are so deeply transformative. They engage both our faith and our mental well-being, helping to quiet the inner turmoil that often fuels anxiety and despair. David also highlights the importance of solitude. He specifies the act of pondering on your beds, a deeply personal and intimate setting. This is not about public displays of prayer or seeking validation from others. It's about private moments with God, unrestricted by pretense. In a world where public personas often take precedence over private authenticity, this instruction invites us to embrace vulnerability. On our beds, in the quiet of night, when no one else can see, we are free to confront our deepest emotions and bring them before God. These moments are where healing happens, when we are most real, and God meets us in that honesty. One of the most striking aspects of this verse is its emphasis on silence. In silence, there are no distractions, no excuses, and no interruptions. But silence can also be uncomfortable. When we strip away the noise, we are left face to face with our fears, our doubts, and the reality of our dependence on God. For many, this is a moment of reckoning. It's easy to fill our days with activity and avoid these deeper reflections, but David encourages us to do the opposite. Reflection gives way to transformation, and silence becomes the fertile ground where God speaks to our hearts. It's in the stillness that we hear His reassurance, feel His peace, and find the wisdom to navigate life's challenges. In a world dominated by constant stimulation, notifications, media, obligations, Psalm 424 offers a countercultural invitation. It calls us back to the simplicity of listening, not passively, but with expectation. By pondering on our beds and being still, we create space to process the emotions swirling within us, to hear God's voice, and to realign our hearts with His will. Silence becomes not an absence, but a presence and encounter with the divine. This practice of stillness is not just for moments of crisis, but a daily discipline. When we take time to be silent before God, we strengthen our ability to navigate life's difficulties with clarity and peace. We begin to grow in trust, knowing that while we can't control everything around us, we are held by the one who can. David's instruction to ponder isn't a passive suggestion. It's a command to actively engage with our emotions, our thoughts, and most importantly, our faith. As you consider this verse today, ask yourself, when was the last time you truly sat in silence before God? When was the last time you allowed yourself to deeply reflect, to lay your frustrations and fears at His feet and wait for His guidance? Silence is not a moment of weakness, but a deliberate act of courage and faith, trusting that God will meet you in the stillness. From this point forward, David's prayer will teach us to move from quiet reflection to bold declarations of trust. As we continue, we'll explore how surrendering to God's care allows us to walk through life with an unshakable sense of safety and purpose, no matter what challenges we face. Trust above troubles, God as a shield. As Psalm 4 unfolds, David shifts from introspection to a bold declaration of trust. In verses 6 and 7, he proclaims a truth that resounds louder than the voices of fear and despair. There are many who say, "Who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound." These verses point us to a profound realization. True security and lasting joy are found not in external circumstances, but in the presence of God. Here, David reminds us that even when troubles surround us, God's protection is a shield like no other, one that restores strength and fills us with joy even in our darkest hours. There are many who say, "Who will show us some good?" This question, voiced by the people, reveals a universal longing for reassurance and hope. It's a sentiment echoed throughout history and felt deeply in our own hearts. In times of crisis, the world often looks for answers in tangible, immediate solutions. It chases comfort in wealth, success, possessions, relationships, or fleeting sources of security that crumble under the weight of life's uncertainties. David contrasts this pursuit with something far greater: the favor and presence of the Lord. Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. This is not a plea for material gain or momentary relief. It's a cry for God's presence to shine through the darkness, for His face to bring clarity, peace, and guidance. David understood that when God is near, no external circumstance has the power to shake us. The light of God's face is a recurring symbol in Scripture, representing His favor, His love, and his intimate relationship with his people. When we face trials, it's natural to feel isolated or even abandoned by God. But this image of his shining face reminds us that he is never far away. It is a reminder of his constant care, of his ability to turn even the most overwhelming situations into opportunities for growth and redemption. David anchors himself in this truth, and it transforms his perspective. Instead of focusing on the chaos around him, he fixes his eyes on God's unchanging nature. The light of his face becomes a beacon of hope that outshines the shadows of fear and uncertainty. David doesn't stop at reassurance. He draws a comparison that cuts straight to the heart. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. Grain and wine were symbols of abundance, prosperity, and security in the ancient world. They represented the good life, the satisfaction of physical needs, the comfort of knowing that you were provided for. Yet David declares that the joy he finds in God surpasses all of that. It is a joy untouched by circumstances, one rooted in the eternal, not the temporary. This joy is not conditional on the grain and wine of life, on wealth, success, or comfort. It comes from the deep assurance that God's care is more stable than any earthly foundation. This principle is timeless. Even in modern life, when we chase happiness in possessions, status, or the validation of others, we find it fleeting. But the joy of the Lord is enduring. It fills the soul and overflows, even when life feels uncertain. What makes this kind of trust so transformative is how it shifts the focus from what we lack to what we already have in God. The human tendency is to fixate on problems, to count the ways we feel burdened or remain unfulfilled. David, however, looks to the security of God's provision and promises. He invites us to see that the deepest needs of our hearts, peace, purpose, and assurance can only be fulfilled by Him. This trust is not passive, it is active. It is a deliberate choice to place faith in the unseen rather than the visible, to hold on to God's promises when life tempts us to believe otherwise. It is not freedom from trouble, but freedom amid trouble, the assurance that no matter how high the waves rise, God's presence is the safer harbor. When David says, "You have put more joy in my heart," he is pointing to the transformative power of surrendering to God as our shield. Trusting God above all else doesn't mean we deny the reality of our struggles. It means we give them to Him. It means we stop fighting battles that aren't ours to fight and instead rely on His strength and provision. The joy that comes from this trust is unshakable because it is rooted in the character of God, not in the uncertainties of life. God's joy becomes a source of strength, a wellspring of resilience that remains constant despite changing circumstances. The power of these verses lies in their ability to reveal the foundation of true security. In a world that promises happiness in things that inevitably fade, David's words remind us that the only lasting joy comes from living in alignment with God's will and presence. This joy is not just an emotion, it's a state of being, cultivated through trust, surrender, and the knowledge that we are held by a God who is both our shield and our provider. David's declaration of joy in God is a call to all of us to examine where we place our trust. Are we looking to temporary sources of security, or do we draw our strength and peace from the Lord? Trusting God above our troubles is not always easy, especially when life feels unstable. But David shows us that it is possible, and that when we do, we gain not only stability but also a joy that the world cannot take away. As we move forward, we'll see how this trust leads us to something even more profound: the ability to rest in the midst of life's storms, knowing we dwell under the safety of God's watchful care. Rest for the weary soul, the gift of peaceful sleep. There's something deeply profound about ending your day in peace, especially when chaos and uncertainty surround you. For many, this concept feels almost unattainable, a luxury reserved for quiet seasons of life. But in Psalm 428, David delivers a truth so powerful, it transcends time and place. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. These words aren't just poetic. They reveal the secret to finding rest even when life feels unbearable. It's not about the absence of problems, but the presence of God as our ultimate refuge and protector. David wasn't a man unfamiliar with turmoil. He lived through betrayal, war, and relentless attacks on his character and life. Yet, despite the ongoing challenges he faced, he was able to lie down and sleep in peace. How his secret was simple yet profound: trust. Trust in the Lord's protection, trust in the Lord's plan, and trust that God was in control even when everything around him seemed wildly out of control. David's confidence wasn't rooted in the elimination of his problems, it was rooted in the character of God. When David says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep," he isn't just talking about physical rest. He is describing a state of spiritual calm that allows the heart and mind to release their grip on fear and anxiety. For many of us, sleepless nights are filled with relentless worry. Our thoughts spin like a whirlwind as we replay conversations, plan for uncertain futures, or try to control outcomes well beyond our reach. This restlessness eats away at our ability to find true peace, creating a cycle of weariness that affects every aspect of our lives. David, however, demonstrates a different way. His ability to rest stems from surrender of control, of fear, and of the illusion that he alone must solve his problems. By entrusting himself fully to God, he finds the stillness his soul craves. What makes these words even more remarkable is that David doesn't claim peace because his circumstances have improved. The troubles are still there. His enemies remain. But he declares peace over his life anyway, not because of what he sees, but because of whom he trusts. This is the heart of faith, choosing to rest in God's promises even when the world gives you every reason to doubt. For David, lying down to sleep wasn't just an act of self-care, it was an act of worship. By resting, he was proclaiming that God was his protector and provider, that he could release his burdens and trust the Lord to sustain him. David's statement also draws attention to a vital truth. Safety comes from God alone. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. This declaration shifts the focus entirely to God's sovereignty. In this world, we often associate safety with things we can control: a locked door, a secure bank account, or measures of personal preparation. And while those things have their value, David reminds us that the ultimate source of safety isn't found in human effort, but in God's unfailing care. No lock, plan, or resource can offer the kind of security that comes from knowing you are held by the Creator of the universe. David's peace wasn't fragile or circumstantial, it was anchored in the unshakable truth of who God is. There's a deeply comforting parallel between this verse and one of Jesus' most profound invitations in the New Testament. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. Both David's psalm and Jesus' words point us toward the same reality. True rest is a gift, something we receive when we bring our burdens to God and trust Him to carry them. It's not something we earn through struggle or self-reliance. True rest begins when we stop trying to control the uncontrollable and surrender it all to God. On a practical level, this psalm reminds us to create space in our lives to rest, not just physically, but spiritually as well. At the end of each day, consider taking time to reflect. Pray and bring your worries to God. Treat these moments as sacred, an opportunity to remind yourself that while your strength may falter, God's never will. A simple prayer based on Psalm 4:8 can act as a lifeline during restless nights. Lord, in your presence alone, I find rest. I release my cares into your hands and trust you to guard my heart and my future. I surrender my worries to you and embrace the peace only you can give. For those who feel crushed under the weight of life's anxieties, David's words are both an invitation and a promise. Rest is not the result of a struggle-free life. It is the result of trust in a faithful God. Sleep, for David, was a tangible expression of his confidence in God's protection. Every time he laid his head down, he proclaimed, "God, I trust you more than I trust myself." What would happen if you made this same choice? What if, tonight, you allowed yourself to stop overthinking, to stop fighting your worries, and instead gave them over to the one who doesn't slumber or sleep, the one who watches over you? As David rests under the Lord's protection, we are reminded that this same assurance is available to us today. Whether your struggles come from external pressures or internal battles, the peace described in Psalm 4 is not out of reach. It is waiting for you right now, found not in perfection or control, but in surrender. As we move deeper into this psalm, David's journey will show us even more about what it means to live in the freedom and safety of God's providence. Actionable takeaways, bringing Psalm 4 into your life. As we journey through Psalm 4, we uncover profound truths about faith, trust, and surrender. But these lessons must become more than abstract ideas. They need to shape how we approach daily life. David's words in this psalm show us that divine peace isn't something far removed from our reality. It's a gift accessible to each one of us when we align our hearts with God's truth. To fully experience this, we must take intentional steps to weave the wisdom of Psalm 4 into our thoughts, prayers, and actions. The first step is to adopt David's unshakable confidence in God's presence. At every point in the psalm, David reveals his trust not in circumstances, but in God's character. Whether he's crying out in desperation or declaring his ability to lie down in peace, every line points toward a foundation of trust built over time. Trust, however, is not an overnight transformation. It requires daily, active choices. Begin your day by surrendering it to God. When you wake up, resist the urge to jump into the busyness of tasks, and instead start with a moment of reflection. Speak to God like David did, boldly, honestly, and with expectation. Say, "Lord, today I trust that you are my strength, my shield, and my refuge. May your presence guide every step I take." This daily moment of faith will shift your perspective, anchoring you in God rather than the uncertainties of life. The next takeaway is the practice of stillness. David's call to ponder in your own hearts, on your beds, and be silent becomes especially relevant in our noisy, fast-paced world. We live in a time where constant distractions dominate our attention: phones, news, social media, endless tasks. But stillness is where clarity thrives. Make time each day to unplug and simply be in God's presence. This doesn't need to be hours long. Even 5 minutes of silence can recalibrate your soul. In those moments, reflect on God's faithfulness in your life. Remind yourself of the ways He has delivered you before, just as David did, and allow that to shape your trust for the challenges you face now. God speaks profoundly in silence, but we must create space to hear Him. Gratitude is another key theme, embedded in Psalm 4. David demonstrates this throughout the psalm by focusing on God's provision, even in distress. He recounts how God has given him relief and put joy in his heart greater than any earthly abundance could provide. Gratitude is powerful because it shifts our focus from what we lack to what we already have. Before the end of each day, take inventory of God's blessings in your life. Write them down if you can. A journal of gratitude becomes a tangible reminder of God's goodness, especially in seasons of difficulty. By cultivating a heart of gratitude, you align yourself with God's perspective, which sees beyond temporary challenges to eternal hope. Another essential lesson from Psalm 4 is surrender. David's ability to rest in peace despite his troubles is a direct result of his surrender to God's sovereignty. He wasn't trying to fight every battle alone. He let go of the need to control the uncontrollable and trusted God to carry what he couldn't handle. This act of trust is deeply freeing, but it requires us to reevaluate how we approach life's pressures. When faced with challenges, ask yourself, is this a burden I'm meant to bear alone? Or am I holding on to something I should entrust to God? Developing this habit of releasing your anxieties into God's hands will not only strengthen your faith, but also bring you lasting peace. The final takeaway is the importance of cultivating joy that transcends circumstances. David's declaration, "You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound," is a reminder to seek fulfillment in God rather than external things. Imagine this, joy so complete that it outweighs any material success, any fleeting pleasure or achievement. This kind of joy is available to you when you prioritize your relationship with God above all else. Joy isn't found in avoiding hardship, but in knowing you are held by a God who carries you through it. Incorporate this into your life by spending time in God's Word, worshiping, and surrounding yourself with reminders of His promises. When you live with this God-given joy, it not only strengthens you, but also becomes a testimony to those around you, a light in a world weighed down by temporary pursuits. Applying the wisdom of Psalm 4 doesn't require grand gestures or complicated rituals. It thrives in the simplicity of daily moments. Wake up and trust God with your day. Find time for quiet reflection. Cultivate gratitude even when life feels heavy. Surrender, control, and allow God to work. Seek joy in His presence rather than in fleeting accomplishments. These practices transform faith into a lifestyle, one that reflects the strength and peace David found in Psalm 4. By bringing these lessons into your daily life, you're not just learning from David's prayer, you're living it. Imagine the possibilities of walking through life with a heart anchored in trust, a mind at peace, and a soul filled with joy that nothing can shake. As we move deeper into the final moments of this Psalm's reflection, you'll discover how these principles don't just help you survive life's challenges, they empower you to thrive, no matter what comes your way. Hope and renewal don't suffer alone. Psalm 4 doesn't just offer a guide to handling anxiety or seeking God's peace, it presents a direct invitation to hope and renewal, a lifeline for anyone who feels crushed under the weight of life's challenges. David's journey in this psalm is a complete arc, moving from desperation to reflection, and finally to a point of restoration. As we reach the conclusion of this transformative prayer, one thing becomes abundantly clear. God's protection is not just for our survival, it's for our renewal, our growth, and our ultimate peace. Through His presence, He doesn't simply bring relief, He ushers in the kind of hope that fuels resilience and the strength to keep going. One of the greatest dangers of hardship is isolation. When we're overwhelmed by burdens, it's tempting to withdraw, to assume no one understands what we're going through, or worse, that no one really cares. But David's words in this psalm challenge that belief. Throughout its verses, He reminds us over and over that God hears us, that He hasn't forgotten us, and that He is actively working in our circumstances even when we can't yet see an outcome. These reminders aren't just meant to soothe, they're meant to embolden us. We are not alone. No matter how dark it feels, God's light can and will break through. David's plea, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness," reveals a critical truth about God. He isn't distant, He is near, intimately responsive to the cries of His people. If you've ever felt that your prayers are hitting a ceiling, that your words are falling into a void, Psalm 4 offers you assurance. God is not silent, even if the answers don't come immediately. He works in ways we often can't perceive, aligning events, people, and moments to bring about not just resolution, but restoration. David's confidence in God tells us one vital thing: prayer is not a hollow exercise. It's an act of faith that connects us to the very heart of our Creator. Part of this renewal comes with understanding the kind of peace God offers. The peace David describes doesn't rely on external resolution, and it's not delayed until all of our problems are solved. It flourishes right here in the tension, in the now but not yet of life's uncertainties. This peace doesn't ask us to pretend things are fine. It meets us in our pain, acknowledges our fears, and replaces them with confidence that God is bigger than anything we face. David shows us that the kind of renewal God provides isn't always the removal of our struggles. It's the transformation of our perspective amidst them. This shift from despair to hope, from chaos to calm, comes when we allow ourselves to cling to God's promises rather than to the outcomes we feel entitled to. The gift of renewal also involves letting go. As humans, we're often tempted to carry the weight of our burdens alone, thinking that we can solve our dilemmas with sheer effort or determination. But what David demonstrates here is deeply counterintuitive. True renewal comes from surrender. Trusting God doesn't mean giving up. It means handing over what was never ours to control in the first place. The surrender that David practices in this psalm isn't passive resignation, it's active reliance. With every word of this prayer, David calls upon the Lord and releases his grip on the things he can't fix. This act of letting go opens the door for God to work far beyond what we're capable of managing on our own. Another vital aspect of hope and renewal in Psalm 4 is found in the promise of God's presence. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. These simple yet profound words summarize the entirety of what David wants us to understand. God doesn't promise a trouble-free life, but He promises to be with us through it all. His presence gives us safety, not because it removes every danger, but because it anchors us in security that transcends circumstances. Imagine walking through fire yet feeling no fear, knowing that your soul is completely protected. This is the kind of hope David offers, Usa hope that steadies us even in the face of the unknown and fills us with the assurance that we are never unprotected, never abandoned, never forgotten. What's remarkable about Psalm 4 is how it not only comforts but also empowers. David's declaration of trust and peace isn't just for his own benefit, it's a witness to others. He takes the time to speak to those who've doubted, those who've sought false comforts, and those whose faith has wavered. He calls them to a renewed perspective, pointing them not to himself as an example, but to God as their source of strength. This is a powerful reminder that our experiences with God aren't meant to stay private. The renewal we experience can inspire others, drawing them into the same confidence, the same safety, and the same hope David found in God. As you reflect on Psalm 4, consider what hope and renewal could look like in your own life. Where do you need to stop striving and start resting in God's promises? What burdens are you holding on to that He is asking you to release? And who in your life might need to hear about the peace you found in God's presence? David's journey shows us that hope isn't something we conjure on our own. It's a gift received when we take refuge in the one who never fails. Psalm 4 leaves us with this undeniable truth. Suffering is inevitable, but so is God's faithfulness. When we choose to cry out to Him, reflect on His goodness, and trust in His promises, we open ourselves to a peace that surpasses all understanding. Renewal begins when we allow God to take our brokenness and replace it with His strength, His joy, and His unshakable hope. You were never meant to carry life's weight alone. Choose today to let God's light shine over your darkest moments, and like David, you too can lie down in peace, knowing that you dwell in the safety of His arms, living in the light of Psalm 4. Psalm 4 begins in desperation and ends in profound peace. It takes us on a journey that mirrors the struggles of our own lives, a journey through fear, frustration, surrender, and ultimately trust in God's providence. David's words are timeless because they capture the essence of what it means to rely on God in times of trouble. Though his challenges might feel distant from our modern concerns, the emotions and questions he expresses resonate deeply with anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed, lost, or burdened by uncertainty. In the heart of this psalm lies the answer to our greatest fears. In God alone, we find safety, rest, and renewal. The beauty of Psalm 4 is not just in the comfort it offers, but in the active steps it leads us to take. David shows us how to cry out to God boldly, how to reflect on His faithfulness, and how to surrender fully to His plans. This is not passive faith. It is an ongoing, deliberate process of aligning our hearts with God's truth. It's about choosing trust over control, peace over panic, joy over despair. David's relationship with God wasn't built in a single moment of prayer. It was formed through a lifetime of bringing his struggles, victories, and every moment in between to God. We are invited into that same dynamic day by day. One of the most remarkable aspects of this psalm is how it reframes the concept of peace. For many, peace is equated with the absence of conflict or resolution to problems. But David teaches us that peace is not dependent on circumstances. It is found in the presence of God. This peace isn't a fleeting feeling. It is a deep, abiding reality that allows us to rest fully, even when life feels unstable. The knowledge that God is in control, that He hears our prayers, and that He is working for our ultimate good transforms how we experience even the hardest trials. Peace becomes a form of worship, a declaration that we trust God's sovereignty over our own understanding. Psalm 4 also reminds us of God's deeply personal love for each of us. He isn't distant or detached from our struggles. He hears our cries, He knows our hearts, and He responds with grace and care. The invitation to ponder in your heart and be still is God's call to intimacy, to slow down and make space for His voice amid the noise of life. These moments of connection are where renewal begins. In the stillness, God replaces our fears with His peace, our weakness with His strength, and our despair with His hope. Through David's honesty, we see that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's the doorway to experiencing God's transformative presence. As you move forward from Psalm 4, the challenge is to live in the light of its truths. When anxiety creeps in, remember David's boldness in crying out to God. When restlessness takes hold, embrace stillness as a sacred act of surrender. When doubts arise, recount God's faithfulness in your past and let it anchor your heart. And when the weight of life feels too heavy, remember these words: "For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." This verse is more than a comforting phrase. It is a promise that no matter what happens around you, God's care is constant, His presence unshakable. In today's world, filled with uncertainty and noise, Psalm 4 offers a countercultural way of living rooted in trust, strengthened by prayer, and guided by God's peace. It reminds us that while we may feel fragile, we are held by a power far greater than anything we face. Like David, we can approach life's challenges with confidence, knowing that we are never alone. His journey from fear to peace can be our own when we choose to follow the same steps of faith, surrender, and trust. Let Psalm 4 become more than just a passage you read. Let it become a rhythm for your life. Carry its truths into every moment of your day. Pray boldly, give yourself permission to rest in God's care, and trust that you are never beyond His reach. As you navigate life's highs and lows, remember the enduring message of this psalm. God's protection is real, His peace is available, and His presence is enough. When you live in the light of these truths, you'll discover a joy and strength that transcends even the hardest of circumstances. May Psalm 4 guide your heart to seek God first and trust Him completely. May it help you find rest in the chaos, hope in the hardships, and peace in His presence. And may it remind you that no matter how dark the night, you dwell in the safety of the one who holds all things together. The same God who met David in his distress is ready to meet you, to strengthen you, and to lead you into renewal. Choose today to walk in the light of this psalm, and let God's peace guard your heart forever.